Blah, 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 blah. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Utah politics are different than national politics in several different ways. For one thing, Utah governors receive a much higher approval rating from state residents than governors in other states. We'll also talk about the Republican Party in Utah as compared to the nation. It seems that there are some pretty big differences among how state Republicans and national Republicans vote with regards to Republican politics. In our final conversation with Rod Decker, you're not going to want to miss this episode. It's got some really interesting things. Check out our conversation.
Well, last topic that I thought we could discuss, which I thought was very interesting, is in your book you'd mentioned that Utah governors enjoy a higher approval rating than in pretty much every other state.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
The best explanation I've heard was Mike Levitt. I asked him about it. And he said, if you do an okay job, they sort of sustain you. And sustain's a Latter-day Saint word. The Latter-day Saints sustain people in their congregations, and they always do it unanimously. There is a Latter-day Saint tradition of supporting leaders, and it extends to governors if you do an okay job. So Utah has popular governors, more popular than maybe any other state. They're certainly contenders. And Utah has long-serving governors. The last governor to be defeated while he was the lieutenant governor. I can't. Her name will come to me in a minute. I'm
Olene
old.
Walker.
Olene Walker got beat, but she was not elected. Yeah, no, she got beat in convention. She didn't even make it to the primary. But she wasn't elected. She served the end of Mike Levitt's term. But the last elected governor defeated was J. Bracken Lee when he ran for a third term. He was beaten in a Republican primary, and then he ran as an independent in the general and got beaten again, and that was in '56. And before that, Herbert Maw when he went for a third term. But the last governor not to win a second term was, I think, Rendell Mabee back in the 20s. So Utahns re-elect their governors, and Utah has the longest serving governors, except for Alaska or Hawaii. They didn't start having governors till a lot later. So we have popular, long-serving governors, and part of the reason is we've been lucky. We've had good governors. Part of the reason is that we have a tradition of supporting leaders.
Okay. And I know you also mentioned something about there were two types of Republicans, tax cutters and budget balancers.
Yeah.
Can you tell how that goes with Utah politics?
Okay. The Republicans covered tax cutters and budget balancers. Utah Republicans are tax cutters in Washington and budget balancers in Utah. In Utah, we have the Utah legislature, Utah governors are scrupulous about balancing the budget. They're careful. Occasionally, there might be a very small deficit that slips in, and they immediately pay it off the next year. I mean, there's no, and they're careful. And they've been that way for decades. They weren't always that way, but they've been that way for decades. But in Washington, all the Utah Republicans voted for Ronald Reagan's tax cuts, voted for Donald Trump's tax cuts, voted for George W. Bush's tax cuts. Now, they say, well, we should cut spending to balance the budget, but they know that's not going to happen. They voted for tax cuts even though it increased the deficit. Now here, they like tax cuts too, and they cut taxes, but they don't cut taxes if it'll make a deficit, ever. And they don't and they'll raise taxes if they need to balance the budget. Here in Utah, a balanced budget comes first. In Washington, tax cuts come first. The difference is that Utah Republicans own Utah state government. They want it to be strong and properly run. Washington, whatever strength Washington has, it's eventually going to be used against us. Put them in deficit, cut the taxes, starve the beast, do everything you can to beat up on them, because even after you've done everything you can, they're going to come out here and run you off federal land or declare a monument or make you allow abortions. I mean, they're going to do bad stuff to you out here, and so you don't want them any stronger than you can than you have to have them.
Well, yeah, and since you mentioned that, can we talk a little bit about the monument with President Clinton and President Obama and President Trump? Tell us about why Utahns haven't appreciated those presidents.
Well, Clinton, when he was running for re-election, his staff came up with the idea of his pollster came up with the fundamental idea, you need a big environmentalist surprise getting toward the election. He had offended some Western environmentalists. They made him worry in Oregon and California. So we'll do a big environmentalist surprise. They thought what it might be, and they said a big monument in southern Utah. The head, Kathleen McGinty, who was the head of the Council on Environmental Quality for him, his chief environmental advisor, wrote him a memo, confidential memo, that said the political purpose behind the monument. She said, you'll make people in Utah mad. They aren't going to vote for you anyway. Don't worry about them. You'll score points with environmentalists in other Western states. Worked out perfectly. He made the monument, stood in Arizona, made the monument in Utah, didn't dare come to Utah. He stood in Arizona, made the monument in Utah. Utahns were mad. The only bad thing from a Democratic standpoint was they threw out Bill Orton, who was the only Democratic congressman. But he carried more Western states than any Democrat since Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Clinton did.
Yeah, in his re-election bid. So it worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. And so there was a big monument down there. Then President Obama, as he left office, created another big monument, the Bears Ears. And they create big monuments in Utah because the reasoning is similar. The environmental movement is national. We can win, and Democrats are environmentalists. We can score with the environmentalists. We pay no political price. Utahns don't vote for us anyway. What the heck? So we got those two monuments. Then President Trump comes in and reduces them, and now it's in federal court, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, great. Is there anything else we've missed that you'd like to talk about with regards to your book?
I don't think so. We've talked about a lot.
All right.
Okay, I'll say this. Utah spends the least amount of money on its schools per school child of any state. And that has, I tell stories about it in here. Educators and Democrats say Utah should spend more. And in fact, Utah gets a little better than average results nationally. But Utah has kids that it ought to get. It's got not so many minority kids. It's got kids with educated parents. It's got kids that live with two parents. All of those things are supposed to raise kids' scores and do, generally. But other states that are like Utah do much better than Utah. Utah spends the least and sort of muddles along with a gentleman's C. And it's been, 40 years. 40 years. The modern fight started in the Reagan administration. They did a report called "A Nation at Risk," saying that the nation's schools weren't good enough. And almost every state took action in response. Utah a little bit. The Secretary of Education at the time was Terrell Bell from Utah. The chair of the commission that did A Nation at Risk was David P. Gardner from Utah. So it was a Utah event, but Utah didn't do much about it. Legislators don't believe in spending money on education. And they tell you, yes, we spend all we can afford. But in fact, they've cut taxes for schools, cut spending for schools, taken money from schools and put it into roads. They do it kind of surreptitiously. When no one's looking, they create a new road fund and divert a little money into it, and no one pays much attention. Utah, since the 1980s, a long time, 40 years maybe, Utah has had the lowest spending per school child, and Utah has not very good results. Now, legislators say we can improve schools. We could do it without more money. They've got reforms. They've got all these ideas for improving schools. And they do one after another. And the educators all say, yeah, and then they never do it. And just one after another. And the legislators are more powerful, but the educators are smarter. But it doesn't. In the end, it doesn't work. Utah kids don't get the education. If they got a better education, their life chances would be better.
Yeah. So is this something, do you think, or should the LDS Church? I would think that this would be a family issue. Do you think the LDS Church could tip the scales towards education spending?
I'm sure the LDS Church could do stuff. I'm sure they won't. I mean, this isn't the sort of thing they get mixed up in. And most of the people watching, the rule of Utah politics is this: the LDS Church shouldn't mess in politics except when they're on my side. And that's the general rule. Yes, they can get what they want. So you wish they were on your side. Isn't that a family issue? Isn't Medicaid a family issue? Isn't education a family issue? Well, it isn't the sort of thing they get mixed up in. Probably we're better off. Probably even if we could do better, we're probably better off doing worse than having those guys decide things for us. That's my view.
I swear there was a state legislator, and I'm trying to remember his name, within the last year or two, and he talked about the LDS Church. He felt like the LDS Church tipped the scales too much in Utah politics.
Well, there have been a number of legislators. There was a guy named Wimmer, he was a conservative Republican, and he used to be a Latter-day Saint, and he's become an evangelical, a nice guy. And he was a conservative legislator up there, and he said that the LDS Church would. I don't think he used the word bully, but he has said essentially, in pretty strong terms, he said that they push people around too much. And Steve Urquhart, who was a senator from St. George, said the LDS Church was threw its weight around too much up there. He had in mind particularly the compromise that the LDS Church worked out with the gay community on the Civil Rights Bill. So he said so that there are always some who say that the LDS Church has too much power. From the first legislature in 1896, I have legislators saying the LDS Church is too powerful up here.
Unless they're on my side, right?
Yeah, unless they're on my side. Yeah, yeah.
Well, great. Well, Rod Decker, I really appreciate you talking about your book. Can you give us your famous sign-off?
Okay, your gospel tangents, huh? Yeah. Okay. Rod Decker, gospel tangents.
Thanks a lot, Rod. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Rod Decker. Rod, I'd like to thank you for letting me come to your home and spend so much time talking about your book, and I'd encourage everyone to go out and buy his book, Utah Politics. It's a really interesting history of politics and how the LDS Church has affected them. So go out and get your copy. And thanks to Devry from Signature Books for helping me arrange this interview. I really appreciate that, Devry. In our next conversation, we're going to talk to BYU professor Alex Baugh. He's probably the biggest Mormon Missouri period expert in the church, I would say. And we're going to talk a lot about the Hans Mill Massacre. And we'll talk about some of the things that led to Missourians and Mormons not getting along in the early 1830s.
Okay.
So politically, we're basically Democrats now in Jackson County.
Mormons were Democrats? Did you just say that?
No question. Yeah. Yeah. So
what happened?
Politically, we were Democrats, which in Jackson County, I mean, it's named after Andrew Jackson. I mean, Jacksonian democracy Jackson. So politically, we're a little more aligned that way, but that pans out differently depending on where we were and so on. But we're definitely not many Whigs in the church.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript. And over here, we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.